Welcome to this episode of Expert Insights, brought to you by Double H Marketing. I'm your host, Trent, and I'm the head of growth here at Double H. Today, we're unpacking one of the most talked about but often misunderstood topics in marketing, segmentation. To help break it down, I'm joined by Naomi, our managing director at Double H. Naomi has helped many organizations make sense of their data and turn it into meaningful, actionable segments. Naomi, great to have you.
Thanks, Trent. I'm excited to chat through this topic today. Segmentation can sound technical, but essentially when you strip it back, it's really about understanding people and communicating to them in a way that resonates.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when we talk about segmentation, why is it so critical for medium-sized organizations, especially those trying to diversify their audience or take their segments to the next level?
I think it comes back to that really exciting topic of marketing fundamentals. It's about getting the right message at the right time in front of the right person. And unless you're segmenting and have an understanding of where your prospect is in their buying journey, what they're interested in, how you motivate them to make that purchase, you can't put the correct messaging in front of them. So while we spend a lot of time talking about segmentation, for me it's actually about targeting. But targeting is actually the message that you put in front of that person, and segmentation is the means to get there, to make those smaller groups, because obviously we can't market to everyone one-on-one. That gets really tricky really fast, but trying to really make sure that as marketers we're doing the best we can to encourage either repeat purchases, first-time purchases, and making sure that, I guess, those conversion paths flow through.
Okay, so you get these definitions of different segments that are relevant to different teams. So imagine IT thinks of it maybe as a contact or a lead, something very technical inside their CRM, whereas your average marketer might see it as a persona or a kind of a group or an audience. How do you bridge that gap and kind of get them speaking the same language about their segments?
I wish I had a silver bullet for that one. I guess fundamentally, I probably wouldn't expect the IT team to come up with segments. They're generally, I guess, the guardians of data within a business, and they're there to make sure the systems run appropriately. I would expect more the actual segmentation themselves to sit more within the marketing and sales teams, depending on the type of organization. But I think fundamentally, when you're trying to get those two types of organizational divisions, teams, job titles, whatever you'd like to classify them as, working together, it's all around how you share information together, take each other on the journey, talk about what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it. So I think socialization goes a very long way. And then I think particularly for marketers, what we're often terrible at doing is showing the results of what we've done when we do run something like an effective segmentation strategy. For example, I've had arguments or strongly worded conversations with people in the past where we've said, we think Y is going to work or Z is going to work. And at the end of the day, I think using a tool like segmentation can take you out of that argument and out of your internal perspective and actually let you say, all right, well, let's put this to the test. Let's see if we target these people with this message and this message, which one resonates the best. Let's let the actual data tell us what the best solution to this is. And that's always a lot of fun because you can be proven right, you can be proven wrong, but the point is that every time you make a decision to try something new like that with your audience, you're learning from it. You're learning how they react, what they're interested in, and what is most likely to work next time you want to ask them to undertake an action.
Well, that's a really good one, actually. You dropped in there, when you are wrong. Can you reflect on some times where you thought you had that ideal segment or persona and you were, bet your bottom dollar on the fact that you knew that this was the right group and then maybe the numbers showed it a bit differently?
I think the biggest danger and when you're most likely to get it wrong, and this is the experience I've had across my career as well, is when you get a bunch of people sitting around the room and speaking on behalf of the customer. Particularly, there's a real danger as marketers that we like to sit in our, I guess I won't say ivory towers, but offices and talk about people as opposed to something like the sales team that goes out and interacts with them on a daily basis. So I think we need to make sure that we are accurately representing our customers and also being aware that nobody likes to be put in a box. So it's okay, what points of data, what do I know about these people, whether I'm looking at, a stage in a buying cycle or what the demographic tendencies are, but how do I remember there's a real person at the end of this process? And if I can, make sure that I'm validating everything I'm thinking about by finding real world examples. I think that's probably the best way to avoid falling over and making some mistakes with segmentation.
So you touched on a couple of things there: demographics, behaviour, maybe things like psychographics or an RFM model within segmenting your data. How should marketers decide what matters most for their organisation?
That is a really good question. I'm not sure I've gotten it right, to be honest, in its entirety across my career. I think you do have a pretty good sense when you've been and you understand an organization's business model and you've been around it for a while, kind of you start to see people almost fall into buckets in terms of how you work with them. For example, here at Double H Marketing, we'll often talk about the different industries. So not-for-profit versus finance. Or we might talk about small, medium or large style of businesses, generally because they come with different levels of compliance, different team structures, different buying groups. So all of those things are relevant for how we would go to market and how we run our marketing here. So I think it's very much, working with your sales team in particular to sit down and go, okay, what do these customers look like? What do we know about them? How do we find that what do they tend to have in common and what do they not have in common? And if you start to kind of workshop that over time, I think you start to get a pretty good idea of at least a starting point. And just to call out here, in B2B marketing or business to business, it very commonly tends to be organization size, job type, department, all of those very straightforward things, because it's what platforms like LinkedIn often use for their segmentation as well. So it's quite easy to match against your desired target groups in that.
It's really interesting, right? Because you mentioned that these platforms kind of force you into a way of thinking about groups of people, whether or not it's like demographics or biometrics or things like that are provided by ad buying networks. I think that one of the things that I've seen in a few, what I would consider quite aspirational organizations in the terms of the way that they identify segments within their customer bases, is when they overlay things like aligning their customer groups to their company's message. You get these very behaviorally driven organizations that design their products and things like that more around a particular way that they want to look to the public. Some brands like Apple and things like that, they don't necessarily care. Everyone's their customer, so they focus on design and things like that. So I've heard from teams internally there that they really focus on segmenting based on groups of behavior and thought and thinking rather than a hard demographic number. So it's kind of interesting when there's a bit of a blend with that rather than just sticking to the status quo.
Yeah, I think it's really useful from what we often see across our customer base to kind of treat segmentation with a bit of an MVP, or minimum viable product approach, just to add on to what you said there, because it's all around, okay, so my hypothesis is X, or I think this group of people are going to react to Y message. Try it, see how it goes. And to your point earlier, you're not going to get it right every single time. Sometimes you might have a hypothesis that, let's talk in general marketing terms, 25% of people are going to open the email and then 3% of them are going to click through the email, which results in X amount of purchases, for example. You can start to see, using those industry benchmarks per segment, did you get it right or did you get it wrong? And was that the anticipated behaviour out of that segment? Now, there's a variety of things that you can go through to work out whether it worked or not. It could be the right segment but the wrong message, or the right segment but the wrong medium. But that is the essential job of a marketer, is to try and figure that out so that we start to really drive the organisation forward with those types of results and things working well.
I love that you said hypothesis, so that really resonates with me. For those watching that don't know my background, I'm actually an exercise physiologist by degree, so I spent many years in science and medicine faculties with many research and papers in front of me. And I think the nice thing about the field of science is that there is this idea that you start with a hypothesis and you test your theory. And scientists are often quite self-confess that they're very happy to be disproven, and that is the pursuit of that field. But we don't often see it talked much about in marketing. I think a lot of the bedrock of the world within marketing doesn't have this very clinical kind of testing methodology, although it is the foundation of things like advertising networks. So that whole idea of a hypothesis and then testing it and being gladly proven wrong to learn more about your customer, I dream of seeing that in more organizations every day.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point you make there. For me, particularly, I'd say I'd spent most of my career in digital marketing, just courtesy of my age and what happened around 20 years ago when I was getting started in the industry. Most things were starting to move into digital. Digital marketing for me these days is experimentation. It's what works when, in front of whom and how. Segmentation and targeting is a really key part of that, but so is messaging and all of these other sorts of things. So even when we have conversations with our customers that want some, say, marketing advice or guidance, I don't think you can ever put a blanket over something and says people like this act like this. The reality is there's different business models, different organizations, different people, different brand perceptions. You've got variable factors in every single thing you do. So I think having a really open mind can be incredibly helpful from a marketing perspective there.
Okay, so take some of those viewpoints testing things, grabbing different demographics or behavioral characteristics. How do tools like CRMs or marketing platforms help, and where can they maybe trip people up in that pursuit?
At a base level, something like a CRM or a marketing automation tool is going to capture the various data components that let you set up a segment in the first place. For example, a common retail segment, maybe I want to find somebody that purchased 3 times over the last month. That might be something based on your organisation you consider a high value segment. So I think basically housing the data and then automating off the back of that what you want to put in front of those people is really the premise of CRM and marketing automation overall. Generalising very broadly there, but that's essentially what those tools enable you to do. I think things tend to fall down when you try to get too specific, or you believe you have the answer to segmentation and the question before you've even started experimenting. For example, we do a lot of personalisation and personalisation within Marketing Cloud here at DHM. And we find that running experiments on websites on behalf of customers is the best way to learn about their audience and to start to work out what makes things tick. You might think a particular set of products in front of a particular segment is the best combination. We've actually run tests before where we've had marketers say to me, I know these are the best products for our brand, and when we put it against perhaps some of the AI recipes, the AI actually wins that test. So I think it's about keeping an open mind as well, which is probably the summary of what we're talking about today.
Big time. Look, you mentioned a few times there some data points that maybe organizations don't really know how to capture. So for those that are saying that we don't have enough data to even take this step, and what's your advice on where they could start?
It's going to depend on your industry. Something like retail is very different to a not-for-profit, which is very different to a financial services organisation. If you are anything to do with a B2B style business, things like who you're talking to, what the job titles are, where they are geographically, all of those sorts of things are going to be very critical because that tends to be how you target, at least at a very low level starting point from a B2B perspective. B2C can be incredibly broad, but we often find we see data gathering, like if you have, say, any other systems, you have a ticketing system for something, you have a website that you're running, you might want to be starting to pull in the data off there, whether it's as simple as someone filling in a form and you're capturing their details for future use, or it's running tags on that website to start to look at what they're looking at and when, and how they interact with the content on your website and the products on your website as well. So it's really going to depend, I guess, on your business model. But really anything that captures data can be pulled into any of the Salesforce systems essentially as a data point. And the better you get at segmentation, probably the more relevant all of those things become.
I remember having a conversation with the CEO of an organisation that their business is hosted and run as an app on Salesforce. She told me that one of the most life-changing experiences for her leading the organisation that she'd bootstrapped and built from basically nothing was that she took the chance to go on a road trip and visit 1,000 of her customers. That was like her goal over time. And one by one, she learnt more than most data points that she had available to her about what they cared about and their product and things like that. And it completely changed the game from her. So I think there's some creative ways in there also to figure out maybe how to guide your next steps in terms of what you should be looking for in the data that you have, right?
Yeah, and I think it's also taking it from places that aren't just from the marketing team as well. Like you mentioned IT before, I mentioned sales. All of these places, particularly sales, is going to have, if you have like a face-to-face sales team, they're going to have an enormous amount of customer data just stashed in their heads. So I think making sure that you're talking across the organisation, working out what's relevant and what your customers care about is really important. So the more heads that do that, the better. And then the question becomes, okay, from a marketing perspective, from a segmentation perspective, what's actually relevant in terms of the messages we want to put in front of them and what we want to ask them to do next as customers.
Looking at data from all different angles, testing hypothesis and being gladly wrong, I'm looking for all ways within our customer base where they're segmenting and finding out new things about their customers every day. That is an exciting thing to see uncover in a lot of our customers. But as with everything, when they uncover the data and give it an attempt, how do you know when it's working? What is the thing that jumps out for you in your past when you've actually nailed it and you can see an uptick? Is it, and where do you look for that in your organization?
So I think that's hilariously one of the hardest things to actually do is to know when something's working. It's quite, relatively speaking, easy to set up a list for an email, hit send, and off the email goes. It's hard to know whether it's worked or not. So I think there's two places you can look for that as a starting point, although this won't be the be all and end all. Number one is what happened with your past marketing efforts. Can you benchmark based off those? For example, if 10% of people last time you sent an email opened it. What happened this time? Did you get 8%? Did you get 15%? Obviously taking in mind that open rates are not the be all and end all these days. But that is one place to start looking. The second is really industry data. You can find a lot online around what those sort of average rates are. So an average conversion rate on a website by industry, an average email open rate. Obviously, these are going to come from different sources, and different sources do say slightly different things, but you'll still get a general sense of how you're performing. For example, if I'm doing something like an abandoned cart email and I've set it up so that I'm expecting 75% of people to convert off that, and I look at an industry benchmark and it says 3% of people convert off that, well, then I'm probably going to be setting myself up for failure there, and it's probably a bit unrealistic. Yeah. Now, I'd love to say, throw down the challenge. Well, of course, if you're an amazing marketer, but I think there's other things out there besides your messaging and your product that impact people, such as someone might not have a lot of time. They might have just been using your site as a comparison site. There's other things that are going on in the outside world as well. So it's really trying to align with the higher levels of those benchmarks as a starting point to understand that, okay, I think I'm doing something pretty decent here.
That's some really good advice. No, I actually have to say I need to recommend that more to some of the organisations, because I think they measure themselves to some pretty high levels, and they'd be quite surprised at how successful they actually are. Look, thank you so much for joining me today, Naomi. And if you out there are wondering where your organisation stands, we've created a segmentation scorecard. You can use it. It's quick to complete and helps you see where your segmentation strengths and gaps are, plus some practical advice and next steps. You can find it on the Double H Marketing website and in the description of wherever you're seeing this podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today, Naomi, and demystifying segmentation.
Thanks so much for having me, Trent, and for, running the podcast as always.
No worries. If you'd like to speak to us further, reach out to us at info@doublehmarketing.com.au. Thanks again.